Good afternoon and good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining Bramisol's webinar, SAP RAR 1.1, using SAP Fiori to improve usability and efficiency. We are going to be recording this, so Chris, could you move to the next slide? So again, thank you all for joining. How do you engage with us during this webinar? First is if you have a question, please submit it in the GoToWebinar Q&A box. It will be located on your dashboard. So take a look at that and submit questions, and we'll try to answer them real time. This webinar is being recorded, so a version will be available to you for download off of our website. And by reaching out and contacting us, we will send you recordings. We also encourage you to go back and take a look at some of our other webinars as well. We have a number of them that we think you'll find very interesting. Feedback. We are running a survey at the end of the webinar. Please fill that out. That is how we know what works and what doesn't work, and how we can continue to improve the quality of both the delivery and content, as well as addressing the topics and issues that concern you most. The slides are available in the webinar handouts box right now. We've moved them up there, so feel free to download those, and you'll also be able to reach out to us and get copies of them. For further information, follow us on Twitter. We will be broadcasting in Twitter during the meeting, and you can go to our website, as I've said, and get more information. I'd like to welcome today's speakers. I am your moderator, John Froelich. I am the VP of Strategic Accounts and Marketing for Bramisol. Presenting today will be Chris Ritterhern, the Director Solutions Architect. Chris has 30 years of business systems experience, 25 years focused on finance and operations, and 10 years at SAP. Hans Christian Metz is also joining us. Hans Christian is a senior lead consultant and an architect and expert on SAP RAR. In addition to 15 years managing complex projects with SAP, Hans is one of our senior experts on SAP RAR and has participated in a number of different implementations, as well as on several of the actual go-lives. Next slide, please. Bramisol is the leader in SAP revenue recognition and revenue recognition. We have the experience, expertise, processes, and tools. We have over 20 years as an SAP partner, and we've participated in 100% of the live RAR implementations. And we participated in the majority of the SAP RAR ramp-ups. Our expertise: we are co-innovators with SAP and have helped in testing all of the various SAP RAR versions. And we are certified SAP RAR consultants. Our processes and tools include demonstrated methodologies, including our self-developed SAP RAR or RAR methodology for implementing SAP RAR and RevRec projects. This is based on extensive experience we've had with our customers and proven methodologies that have worked in getting them up and running. We also have workshops, pilots, and consulting. We have the Bramisol RevRec Academy. And we have a center of expertise with experts in SAP RAR and revenue recognition that can help you get RevRec ready. We've been identified by SAP as the go-to partner for SAP revenue recognition. And we've helped numerous Fortune 100 pharmaceutical healthcare companies get up and running using our SAP RAR cloud platform. And we'll speak more about that in the future. With that, I think I will turn it over to my friend Chris Ritterhern. We'll give you everybody an overview of SAP RAR. and talk to you about how you can improve efficiency and usability with SAP RAR using Fiori and SAP RAR. So Chris, take it away.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate that, and appreciate the nice intro out there. Hello, everybody. This is Chris Ritterhern, and today we're going to look at RAR from a couple perspectives. We're going to look at it, obviously, first starts, we're going to look at it from the usability performance perspective. But before that, we're going to spend just a little few slides on, for those that are new to our webinar series, what is going on in the revenue accounting world, what's happening, what are the key aspects about the new regulatory compliance. Then we'll start to hone in on the use case and the user paradigm, and we have a couple of scenarios we'd like to show you. One's more extensive, the Fiori one. The first one is just to talk about how can I interact with the new revenue accounting module from SAP from the perspective of I want to use it as the holder of record, but not the end-all be-all. So I want to feed it appropriate things as they occur, and we're going to use a project example in this case. That's not to be confused with the new 1.2 version, which has integration to SAP project systems. We're going to just show a simpler way to drive it directly as if I was doing a project from an operational contract. That in functionality now has been enhanced, and if you're using project systems, you can do quite a bit more from there. For those who'd like to learn about more about 1.2, please feel free to contact us. We have that system active, and I'm more than happy to talk about that and some of the distinctions in there. Also keep in mind that with this, with Rammus, I'll be talking about our roadmap to success, and also again the Fiori from the new roadmap. So, key message about RA is it is coming. You must do it. For those that are public, they already have had to report on their quarterly statement what their plans are. We see the challenge really for companies out there is just getting ready and getting it started. And what key thing to recommend to keep in mind is the as is done. SAP has written the component that is regulatory compliant. So you have actually a working model, and that's why we are constantly and strongly suggesting get in there, get your feet wet, get a sense of what it looks like, then step back, give it some thought, and then decide, okay, now how am I going to take my company into full revenue accounting compliance with the new regulations? So we see that as an iterative approach. It's not just a jump in and there we go. It's jump in, get a sense of it, get that knowledge built up within my company, get everybody who is in various departments that are going to be involved, engaged, and then use that knowledge to build where we're going to go from there. So one of the aspects that SAP had in mind that was very key to this was to really automate and simplify the new revenue accounting, where you take all the activities that happen in the transactional world, bills, invoices, revenue-related documents. We refer to that as the operational transaction layer. We'll be showing an example of that. And then get them all funneled down into the revenue accounting module that SAP has supplied, and then it will automatically make all the journal entries for you per the new regulations. Hans, what are you seeing out there in terms of the simplification because of this new module?
Well, it's actually a mix of things, simplification as well as automation, as well as, well, pure compliance with the guidelines. So what I've seen, for instance, is that pre-RAR, a customer used to do pretty much all of their revenue recognition in Excel spreadsheets, basically a chain of Excel spreadsheets. And you know, obviously, the problems that come with that, right? So you make an entry, channel that through, do all the conversions. Maybe you have very nifty macros in there and so on, and then you come out with an amount. Well, then something changes, and instead of the change going through in real time, or you're just having to press one single button, now you have to go through all these versions of the spreadsheets and so on and so on. So that is a simplification, and that obviously also goes into the question of what you're actually ultimately coming out of with an Excel spreadsheet. You're coming out with a with data, but not with the posting itself. Now, the RAR solution obviously is going all the way. We want to have complete, perfect, fine, correct postings into the general ledger. So that's obviously ultimately the aim. And that also leads to compliance issues, because in that one case specifically where we implemented RAR, the customer basically handled some of the problems around this whole Excel approach by having an extremely high threshold. Basically, they only looked at revenue recognition for contracts up from $500,000. So, and then it depends, obviously, how happy your auditors will be and would be with that. So that's not an issue with RAR, because whether that contract is $500 or whether it's $5 million, we'll channel it through, and we automatically generate the journal entries. So I think that's really the long and short of it. That's what we try to achieve with RAR. Back to you.
Thank you, Hans. And the hallmark of the new revenue accounting regulations, the IFRS and US GAAP, is the 5 steps, really applying the 5-step litmus test to your business processes that are deferred revenue related, and seeing how they apply and how you're now going to be able to determine that. One of the areas that we're actually finding quite a bit of discussion on is in determining step 3, to determine the transaction price. It seems that there is a complicated, sometimes very complex discussion about what exactly is the transaction price, especially for customers engaged in bundled type sales, or where they're providing something previously such as a license that automatically included maintenance, but they never had called out the maintenance because it was just included. So now, under the new regulations, they're having to identify that and the revenue stream that represents as a part of the overall sale. Hans, what's your thoughts on some of the impact of these 5 steps? If you could just briefly talk about what you're seeing out there right now.
Yeah, so the interesting thing with this slide is that obviously, I mean, if you have seen one of our webinars presentations, we always have the slide in there, and that's simply, well, that's the guideline, right? That's the step order. That is how SAP built its application, right? So that is a given, and you cannot repeat that often enough. Now, I actually never really get tired of explaining this or talking about this slide, because there's always something new. For instance, one aspect that was a little bit new to me that we discussed recently at an implementation at a POC was the question of how to get the data into RAR. And what I mean by that is that obviously, well, some of the pieces, if you have SD, it's quite clear, right? So you typically have your condition types, you have prices and so on, so that comes in. There might be some issues with transforming for compound, for PUB, for bombs and so on, so specific issues. But sometimes the customers also ask us now for automating specific transfers of data into the system. So for instance, transferring possibly even whole models, so like groups of POBs, which you can do, right, specifically like for services industries, professional services. So there's multiple ways to get into that system, and that actually is an interesting area. It is not quite the engine itself, but it leads to the engine, and obviously it's vital data for the calculations. Yeah, so this will remain, obviously, because it is the step order we're following. This will remain the slide to go to in our presentations, and there's always going to be something new. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Hans. Performance obligation, that is certainly the new term under the new regulations. It's a very important term, and it discusses and is detailed out specifically as any transfer of goods or services to the customer in a contract. So you step back and say, are we transferring a good or a service? For example, that scenario I was talking about where you had license with maintenance. Maintenance is a service you're delivering to the customer, even though they may have just thought, oh, well, upgrades are included for a year, I don't have to be concerned about that. But things that you would do in relation to an activity with a customer, such as administrative type things or something that's a setup that's not being transferred to the customer, those aren't considered performance obligations. It's just those ones that are specifically being something that you're providing to the customer directly as part of the sale or the contract. So enough of the 101. Let's get into the subject matter of our presentation today. And let's talk about what we're up to. Right now we are our environment, well, this is what the before looked like, and it's still there actually, but we've added on to it, and I'll explain to you in just the next couple of slides. We're using RAR as an add-on module to the ECC module. If you want to load in RAR, at least you need to be in Enhancement Pack 5, by the way, and 6.0. If you're there, then you can load up RAR. 1.2 was just released, and that's the one I was talking about that has the new integration with project systems. 1.1 was the big boy on the block at that point. Okay, so let's talk about sort of the flow diagram of what happens when you have RA in the system. You can have an external or direct connection to ECC, so you can feed it from a contract created, and that's the simple example we're going to show you, and talk about it as being externally maintained thereafter. So a contract can be created in our ECC system and automatically moved over into revenue accounting, where it takes on a mirror contract called a revenue accounting contract, and the performance obligations are called out within, and we'll take a look at what that looks like. Or you can come from an external system, in which case it would be just a file. It's prepared by the external system. It goes through the same transfer routine, and it goes through the same revenue accounting stream process. Finally, at the end, as Hans was talking about in simplification, the posting takes place, and it's an update to the GL accounts, and then from there you would determine where to percolate it further into other systems if it came from an external system, for example. For those who've been on prior webinars, you've seen this slide, so this is old news, but just for those that are new to us, just want to give you an idea of the sort of the flow of the process. So this is what we're going to be spending time in today. So off to the left is our same ECC 6.0 system with RAR loaded. We've now put in a Fiori gateway, which runs on the NetWeaver stack, and we've also loaded up Lumira for Teams. What you may not notice here is that the word HANA is not anywhere in here. So this is not a HANA environment. This is strictly a Fiori gateway loaded on ECC, and Lumira for Teams is strictly on a server that had some extra memory on it. So there's not a HANA DB requirement in this particular scenario that we're demoing today. Although if you load up HANA, you have lots more and great, fantastic functionality as a part of that new technology that SAP has come out with. But for the majority of those that aren't there yet, this is the intent was to provide you a way to get to that usability, that productivity, and also that analytic without having to get invested in a full HANA deployment just yet. Although many of you have that on the drawing boards, and for those that are already there, this lays into that landscape quite nicely. Okay, so let's go onward now and take a look at what we're going to be seeing today. So a couple of scenarios. One is we're going to use RA as a holder of record for projects. And we'll look at a simple scenario for that and talk about how it's maintained with an external program that's not an SAP program. And then we'll move into the Fiori and the visual analytics from Fiori Launchpad and talk about the usability index that Rammus is really looking at with this paradigm being introduced with Fiori. One of the things that Rammus is very much invested in, and that is moving forward at RA and moving the banner forward and adding functionality and intellectual property so that when we provide capability to our customers as an RA partner, we're also providing a raft of tools and techniques to help them be more efficient and take better advantage of what's in RA and interacting with RA. So that's an ongoing mission statement from Rammus, and this is what you're seeing as the results of some of that activity. Okay. So our simple scenario is this. We just have a project with 4 phases. And in these 4 phases, they're initially priced the same. We're basically just using a contract to inject this into RA and get the RA contract. And then thereafter, we're going to maintain it externally and say, hey, we completed 25% or 50% of phase 1 or however we want to call it. But what's interesting now is this actually doesn't require the standalone selling price. So, we've talked about the standalone selling price. We've said it's required. However, there are instances where it's not required. Hans, do you have some thoughts about where you've seen instances where the SSP is not relevant for that particular deferred revenue scenario?
Yeah, so first off, obviously, there is the situation which this is an example for, where you don't really need or you don't really intend to do an allocation between the elements. So while obviously, I mean, the main idea with the engine is that you are doing an allocation between multiple elements, right? It could well be that in some cases you do not want to do an allocation. It would not make sense to do an allocation, and that's, for instance, the case here. You don't do an allocation between phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, unless, well, there would really be an indication to that that you're subsidizing one phase over the other for maybe luring the customer in or anything like that. So that's one option. So there's basically no allocation intended. Then another, which this also kind of like fits, is that the items are very unique. So you don't really have an individual standalone sales price. In some cases, we're seeing customers, because if you want to have an allocation done, you need a standalone sales price. So they basically just set the standalone sales price as the transaction price, right? So that's one way to get around that. And then obviously we also have the case where data, again, could also be related to the unique items where the standalone sales price is basically, or the prices and so on are actually set from outside, so for instance from project systems, which this could be an example for, although we are running it a little bit differently. And lastly, the easiest case I think that we've seen in extenso in multiple implementations is the classic freebie, right? So well, not the freebie, actually the other way around. The freebie is actually the other way around, the mirror case, where you have a standalone sales price but you don't have a transaction price. The other way around is something that you can only sell along with other items, but you still want to separate it out as a POB, for instance, an activation fee, right? So the activation obviously is something you cannot sell alone, so there is no standalone sales price. In that case, yes, you can handle it as a zero standalone sales price and then just allocate the transaction price to other POBs. So I think that's pretty much the items I've seen around this lately. Okay, back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Hans. And for those of you that were sweating out the SSP going, holy smokes, I got to cough up an SSP for everything, we're giving you an instance of where it is actually not applicable. We've run across a number of customers saying, every time we make a deal with a customer, it's unique and the price is unique to that thing and it's not something they could buy separately on their own or somebody else could buy separately on their own. What are we going to do about SSP? And the answer is, you don't have to worry about it. It's taken into account in the new regulations. So let's take a look at some software here. So I'm going to log into my SAP system here, for those that can see it, strictly from the operational contract perspective. In other words, I need to have my operational contract live somewhere, and this is where it's going to live. Let me just put in my customer information, and now I'm going to create a project that has 4 phases to it that we talked about earlier. So putting that information in, this is live, so everybody can say, hey, they didn't give me screenshots, they're actually showing me live software the entire time, which is absolutely correct. Okay, so I've got my project with the 4 phases in there. The total is $100,000, but you can see it up there. Okay, so this is my vehicle. What I'm doing is I'm using this merely as a vehicle to inject an RAR a contract into RAR. So I'm not using it as necessarily the master, or I'm just using it as a way to get to the revenue accounting module and then have it track the related ongoing deferred revenue as I complete my milestones or tasks or pieces of these phases as I go through. That way I can just have it mirror what's going on, and then I can go off and maybe I don't have an SAP project system, or I only use a portion of it, or I'm doing multiples of others of things that eventually roll up to major phases and components in that. So if you notice in the PO number I stuck the word RAR, that's because one of the things that we've added to our system is workflow, and we have a workflow that's actually bird dogging that PO number, and if it sees the word RAR, it automatically does the transfer for me into the RAR system. So now let me just go back out, and I'll see I just got a message here that for that sales contract 899, the RA module has now the RA contract has now been created. Let's take a look at that RA contract. So now I'm moving into the RA module proper. Just in the contract search, there are a variety of techniques to get into there. We're going to take a look at that here in just a moment. So it was contract 899. And what you can see here is if you're looking at this, is both IFRS and US GAAP regulatory compliant revenue accounting contracts were created. So I'm in compliance for both accounting principles at this point, courtesy of my revenue accounting module. Okay, so let me just narrow this down here, come back up. All right, so now I'm looking at my contract here. Let me expand it out a little bit there so I can see here's my phases and the $25,000, and everything looks pretty good from that perspective. Nothing's fulfilled here. I'm going to look at the revenue schedule so I can just get a picture from that perspective. Okay, so now I see that here's my project out there, and there's one piece that we need to do to our project, and that's give it a project name. So we added a component in there for that. I'm just back in here, and let me put my project name in here, and I'm going to call this Project 104 Overall Services Webinar Today. Okay, good. Okay, so this is the way that we use to identify it, so I'm going to save that. Okay, good. It did that. So now let's go look in my project updater. So we have a handy little routine here called a project updater. And we're going to look at the US GAAP functionality here, and let's just look at the projects out there. And then here's my webinar project today. I'll double click that and bring that information in. So what this external module is doing, we wrote it in SAP because it was handy. It's a handy language to write applications in, by the way, but not the only one. We just happen to use this, so you can see that nothing's been fulfilled on any of these phases right here. And what we're showing is an example of where we're directly updating revenue accounting. There's nothing in between our routine here and revenue accounting. So we're showing you the example of, I have an external program. It could have been written in PHP. It could have been written in HTML5 client side. It could be that I've done something from another project system and kind of worked the interface a little bit. So let's say that I'm 50% complete on this particular aspect of phase 1, and I'll submit that. Okay, so I've updated that there. Now I'm going to go to my RA contract and do a refresh. So you can see right now revenue is set at $100,000. I'll do a quickie refresh, and I'll see now that I've got recognizable revenue of $12,500. So 50% done on phase one. I'm now able to recognize that. Let's go back and do that one more time. Let's say we're now 100% done with this and update the RA contract again. Okay, so now I'll go back into my RAR system, and I should see that 12,005 changed to 25,000. And in fact, there it is. So now I can see that I'm 25% along in my project. That's why these numbers worked very well, by the way. And I've got $25,000 that when I do my posting will be updated to the general ledger. So just a simple example of how I can move through it and see this information. So let's take a look at my presentation again and talk about what we've just seen. So I've included some annotated screenshots. I'm just going to skip through a few of those right now because you've seen that, but I just put them in there later because I know in a demo people go, gee, I just saw a bunch of stuff, but you know, I didn't see every detail, so I put screenshots in there with highlights on some annotated phases here. And let's just get a little bit further and talk about when I do a posting, what actually happens. So when I post it, that money is automatically adjusted into these particular accounts out there. And Hans, what's your impression about what you've seen going on there that you can help people understand how straightforward this process is with the SAP RA module in place?
Well, I mean, like everything in SAP, straight is a relative term, right? So once you have basically fought your way through your different scenarios and you've basically done the configuration that you want, then the straight thing is, well, it's just built for volume, right? So you can just post and hand through, and the system will come up with all those postings. Even in this very simple example that you see here, though, you already realize, well, what is that? That receivable adjustment account, what is that? So SAP is using multiple accounts so that it channels amounts through. So it channels, for one, in this case, a recognized revenue that wasn't billed yet, right? So it channels that from sales revenue where it gets a credit, and then it basically channels that through to unbilled receivables, and that will actually be taken out once the billing occurs. But the system does all of this based on obviously rather complex configuration that has to be set up correctly. But then after that, it's all rolling down the hill. So I think simplicity is probably a relative term there. But back to you, Chris.
Thank you, Hans. And then just getting a little bit further, we got a little further with the project and the posting. We put these screenshots in here so that you can take our handout away and say, wow, that's what I saw. It is very straightforward. So what we just saw was a multi-phase project in revenue accounting and direct update in the revenue accounting module. Okay, as I said earlier, let's switch gears and let's talk about RA and Fiori and the visual analytics when we have Fiori in place. We've got two roles, an account role and a finance manager role. So with that, let's take a look at the system and see what we've got out there. So right now I'm going to log into my Fiori portal, which is right here. Let me just minimize that for just a moment and expand it out. Okay, so here I am in Fiori. I'm going to come in as an accountant. Hey, Hans, remind me to use a shorter password. Okay, so now I'm logged in and my role is accountant. And one of the nice things about Fiori is that I have the ability to have role-based access. So right now I could look at contract status, for example, here. So I'm just going to click on that Fiori tile, and I can track my contracts out here. There's the one we just created, $8.99, if anybody was paying attention to numbers. This is just a Fiori view of it. You can see the different components and where the phases are. And you might want to say, hey, well, it doesn't look like it's shipped or anything like that. Because remember, we're just using that as a vehicle to talk to RA. We weren't going to necessarily be doing much from the SAP side because we have our project system for that functionality, and we're using that functionality for all the interactions related from that perspective. But we need to have compliance per the new regulations. Okay, let's step back. Okay, so right here in this group, in my group here, I have revenue accounting, and these are three of the tiles that we have created that interact directly with that ECC RA system we were just in. For example, let's say that I'm looking at, what contracts are in error. Right now it says 88 contracts are in error, and I'm going to say, gee, that's a lot. I need to go in there and figure out what's going on out there and see what these kinds of errors are, and then determine what actions I need to do to help rectify or get some of these taken care of. So I'm just looking here at this one contract here in the middle of the page. I'm going to click on that, and then Fiori is going to bring up and show me all the different aspects and error codes that have been against this POB. Now, we obviously have injected some of these, otherwise if everything's set right, you shouldn't get any errors. But in this case, we've injected some, and I can see, okay, well, there's 2 that are warning and 2 that are errors. So now I need to go off and take further action. And if I come back and look at my list here, I can see, okay, a lot of them have there's quite a few errors for some, not some for some of the others, and determine where I want to take my action, or I can search for specific contracts to see if it's an error, if this list is really big. Now, we would think your list would be pretty small, if at all, in the error mode. Now, the other thing is we want to also show you the concept of work list. So now I'm just going to go in and I can see I've got 45 contracts for me to review. So I'm going to go in there, and these have been assigned to me. They're in my work queue, and they're in the status to be approved, or they need to be reviewed for correctness, or whatever my company procedure is regarding these contracts. So now I'm going to look here, and I can see here there's one here that's pending review. Let's go and take a look at that particular contract. And it says it's newly created. I can see the POB information related to it. I can see that the actual operational contract it came from. In this case, it came from ECC, but that could be an external reference also. And then I can say, now I'm going to select this line and take further action and approve it, or whatever the steps are that are appropriate for this particular performance obligation, or I might do it on the entire contract. But very nice. I can see the list very simply. Obviously, it's a very large list because we have it set up for demo purposes, but I've got the capability to see that. If I needed to start to get into more detail, and I want to start to see more details about what's going on there, I could have it click through from there, or maybe my first view is I just want to go into a list and take a look at detailed contracts out there and just get a sense of what's going on. So I'll pick this particular one here, and I can see it's got 2 performance obligations. One's software subscription, one's hardware. And I can see what the standalone selling price is, its current status, the performance obligation name, its value. So easily I can come in and start to see more detail about what this is in a very easy to see, easy to look at screen. And again, if I wanted to look at my particular contract I created earlier, I just type that in and I'd be looking at that contract. Okay, so that's just the accountant role. So let's log out from Dave Accountant and log in as manager now and see what. And take a look at it from a manager's perspective. So here we go, same place again, only this time we're logging in as accountant manager. And you'll notice that in this view there's some extra tiles out here. Same tiles in the sales processing side, we just wanted to show continuity, but in the RA one I've got a couple of extra tiles out there that allow me to see more detail. So again, I can look at the contract scenario, the work list, but now I want to get a visualization of what's going on out there. So right now I'm going to click on this, and this is going to launch my visual analytic dashboard from a summary view. So remember, as we bring that information in here, it's making that trip here where it's rolling from here down, reading the data, and then rolling back up here. So just understand that that round trip is taking place to the ECC system as it brings that information back up for me. And we'll take a look at what my dashboard looks like from my analytics perspective here as it comes up. The idea is now that I'm seeing live data, and that's the beauty of this thing here. So let me just minimize this for just a second. Here we go. Minimize that. And bring up my analytics. So let's just fit this to the screen so we get a nice view of it. Okay, so I've got a dashboard that's read directly into the ECC RA system. And what's nice is I'm looking at real numbers here. And Hans, do you have some comments about what you're actually seeing from the numbers perspective before I do an update of this particular view?
Yeah, so what I always stress when you see these pictures, there's a lot of pretty pictures you can get on your data, right? So there's a lot of data and there's a lot of pretty pictures. But what you have to really realize here, this is not some kind of sales-ishy data. This is not something the salespeople think is happening on the revenue side or anything. This is not a kind of like a tentative revenue picture or something. this is actually recognizable or recognized revenue. So this is after the engine, right after the engine has had all the information coming in from SD or from external systems, processed that and came up with the revenue that is going to be recognized over the near future or that has been recognized in the period you're looking at. So this is real-time, really good information. This is not data, this is really information, because before what you looked at was sales, but then, well, how does that percolate through to revenue recognition, to actually revenue that, for instance, is reported to the street? Well, it's a long way, right? This is actually including all of those manipulations, all processing, everything. This is actual information, right? Back to Chris.
Thanks, Hans. And then what's also interesting, too, is that as I look at this, if I look at this bottom left one here, I can see a trend there that may not be one that I was expecting. And this is a revenue summary by quarter, and I can see in first quarter, off to the far right, I'll see it's got planned revenue, unscheduled revenue, and recognized revenue, and it looks good, but the trend going to Q2 and then through to Q3, wrong way. So obviously, my operations team put in their facilitation phone calls. We won't say what those phone calls are like. And the team got back together, and I'm headed in the right direction. But I'm able to visually see that wrong version of a plateau out there because of the visual analytics in this dashboard. Let's talk about another flavor of these analytics here, by the way. So let's look at my RA dashboard. Let's take a look at this one from a detailed POB view. So again, reaching back into the system, pulling data back out, bringing it up into a dashboard, but this is from a POB perspective. So the idea is that I can look at the individual performance obligation types that I have out there and see which ones are more engaged than other ones, which ones are bringing in more revenue. And again, I'm looking at the real-time data as it makes that round trip up and down. So let's just fit this to my screen here so we can see it all here. So I've got a tag cloud here, and these are the names of individual performance obligations. So I can see right here as I look over user acceptance. Look at that. I've got $2 million in contractual price, 50% along, generally speaking. Project installation, I've got a contractual about $2 million out there of that. Of course, there are details. So the size of the word or the performance obligation is relative to its revenue, and the color is related to its contractual price, and I can hover over and get information. Or I can just look at it from those who like pie charts. So from a pie chart perspective, I can see service is, from a contractual standpoint, my biggest value, dollar value out there. So that looks really good. That's not talking about where it is, just saying just of that particular item. But let's look at the revenue perspective. Service is still big from a revenue perspective, which means that a lot of this has been converted over. But I can see here, what about this sort of orangey one here? Okay, so that is rent, by the way, has been well collected in terms of revenue. Or in this simple scenario, we left this element here, and somebody said, look, revenue claims for claims analysts. What's that exactly? And that had to do with a relatively simple scenario that we're helping to model for a client, and they were having a contract where they're providing a claims analyst, and this is what they contracted, in other words, what they expected to have as revenue, but this is the actual amount they've been getting and collecting over time. So they just want to focus on this particular individual resource they supplied, what they saw as the overall revenue picture, and yet this is what has been collected at this point in time. So you can actually focus this in and look in very close detail, because I created a performance obligation type specific to this particular scenario so I could track it this way. Okay, that was probably a mouthful of words for you folks, but now let's go back into the presentation now that you've seen how Fiori works and the analytics that launch from there. And let's talk about, again, if we go backwards a little bit, you have these slides in your deck, so you'll be able to look at these again here, and then you can narrow in on one of those. So we talk about, having RA and the return that I'm getting, the productivity, the usability enhancements, the visibility into revenue contract, being able to leverage contracts and market data, the insights to the impacts out there, that's very important. And the transparency on the deferred revenue stream is very easy to see. I was looking at the real information as you were seeing. And when we talk about alignment, I would defer, let's say, Hans, you've seen what that alignment discussion looks like out there as you're working with companies to deploy. What's your thoughts on alignment as you see this going forward?
Yeah, so I think right now a lot of organizations, Yeah, so you have on the one hand, you have C-level executives that that have to report financial data, that try to optimize their decisions, that try to drive the decisions in an overall sense for the organization. And then on the other side, you have sales. Now, I'm not saying that sales doesn't want to do that and doesn't want to follow that, but sales obviously has its own drivers and its own interests. And one of the things that kind of like keeps the two apart a little bit is simply the connection via real-time information, via real-time execution, via visibility. And obviously, just like we've seen, right, visibility on actual data, that would make a difference, because then, for instance, management could say, well, I can see already that my recognized revenue for this quarter goes down. Maybe that is in the, like, for instance, in the context of a transformation from a goods-based, delivery-based more to a service subscription-based business. That is okay. Maybe it's not okay, but you can at least, if you have the information, for instance, through these Lumira information from run on RAR, you have the information, you can actually take the decisions, you can actually say to your sales folks, okay, so this is all very good, but we have to maybe adjust that a little bit in this area. We have to try to go a little bit faster in our transformation because we want to show to the market that we're doing this and that and the other. And that is very, very hard to do. Is between you as a C-level executive and the salespeople is a huge string of Excel spreadsheets, right? And that is part of the alignment that RAR brings, and that also specifically the information that you can draw out of RAR brings. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Hans. And then, as a reminder, the SAP has designed the RA to be an engine so that you can actually have it fed from non-SAP systems that are your contractual vehicles. As you can see, here's a list of some of the companies that you could feed into, and we've done that. It's very common that we'll come in and we'll find that not only do they do the majority of their work for it through SAP, but they have other outlying business systems that were deferred revenue related, and now they have to look at feeding those. And absolutely, SAP has built it to be an engine, so you can actually feed it directly. You don't have to have master data set up in ECC. It's just in RA. You feed all the information in there, including customer and sales price, and take advantage of the POBs that you've set up, and then it feeds back out. So, best practices, a roadmap to success. Let's talk about what we have helped to develop a 5-activity step where we come in and help you do a quick POC so that you get your, as I said earlier, get that sense of how it operates and see what it actually means to deploy a few of your scenarios and get them to work through RA. It's already written, it's as is, it uses a rules engine that's very straightforward to use. We've seen a lot of different incantations, so we know when, okay, here we have to do this component, or here we have to do that, but we're generally finding that for some of the mainstream companies, they can pretty much use it and just go with it. Some are finding, hey, I'll adjust my business process to fit what SAP is providing, so you discussion after you had a sense. So we get started in there. We do a quick comparison to all your existing scenarios and the standard scenarios, and then we have an activity 3, which is really iterative, and activity 3 and 4 are really is an iterative agile type of loop where we deploy it, look at it, try it, get them people to think about it and see it, come back, make adjustments, and just keep working back and forth collectively as a team until we get to the point that, yep, that looks like that'll work for us. We understand it's new. And so now we can take this and run it around the company and say, okay, here's the new thing that's coming, here's what you got to deal with. And then use that information to build, okay, what is our next steps to go to production? What are all the processes we're going to do? Which ones are we going to do first? It could be volume-based. It could be critical revenue-based. They're all different criteria upon which you would then apply. And then also you saw the analytics. I have a doorway to some very interesting analytics that I'll probably want to bring into this particular aspect. So with that, let me turn it back over to John.
Hey, thanks, Chris, and thank you, Hans, for a great presentation. Just quickly, reminder, why Rammus? We are the company that has the experience, expertise, processes, and tools. Particularly to take a look at the experience and expertise. We saw how SAP Fiori can be used to help improve efficiency and usability through the use of tiles and through the use of different roles and responsibilities. So that was really great. I hope you guys got a lot out of that. Next slide, please, Chris. So in closing, don't wait. You need to understand the new accounting standards now, and you need to act now. Many of the companies that we've been speaking with know that they are behind. We have received feedback from a number of companies that have said they wish they had started earlier. Recently, the chief accountant for the SEC indicated that he felt that there was significant amount of effort required and did not see that kind of effort happening. So we need to get started now. SAP Revenue Accounting, or RAR, simplifies compliance. Not only does it simplify compliance, but it simplifies the process for compliance. And by using tools such as RAR, Fiori, you can simplify your compliance. And Rammus, we're the experts. We have the leadership, we have the thought leadership, and we have the experience to help you understand how to engage with and use SAP RAR to simplify your revenue accounting processes. Next, Chris. So thanks, everybody. Let's see if we have any questions out there. We're ready for some Q&A. Any questions out there? So there are a couple of questions. Let me throw one out there for you. Somebody was asking Hans and Chris, is there a limit to what platform you can use Fiori on?
Actually, it's any standard approved SAP platform. So Linux, Windows, any of the standard platforms that you can run SAP on are approved platforms for running Fiori on. Okay.
Another question came around. Can you help me better understand how I can configure different roles with Fiori and Enable? We saw one or two of them, but are there ways that we can customize and create different roles in the organization to improve usability?
And that's certainly a good question, and that's something that we find is very experiential. That's one of the goals of Fiori, is to really help users follow the flow of how they work through a task versus a bunch of individual little activities. So towards that end, there are some standards out there, and then we see it as a matter of adjusting those or tweaking those. And as we build a library over time specific to RA, hopefully we'll have a one that fits or is really close. If not, it's a pretty straightforward process for us to bring a Fiori tile into existence. SAP is constantly adding additional tiles for the operational perspective and ECC, and we certainly expect to see them do that in the future. For RA, we don't know when. It's not exactly, they've got a lot of other components they're trying to make sure that they could cram into software because of the new regulations. But in the meantime, we're waving the flag of usability and really providing expertise and exact concrete details about how you use it and what you can do, and introduce the paradigm of Fiori into your company if you haven't had a chance to do that.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Also, a question here on how are we seeing, or how are you guys seeing, and Hans, maybe this is, you've been on a lot of projects. How are you seeing companies using data and Lumira and data to improve their decision-making capabilities?
Well, so the reality is that RAR in this form and shape is pretty new. So I think we're only really at the beginning of seeing how that information, that improved information, that automation is impacting the business processes. You can see it already a little bit actually in the projects, how the projects progress, because sometimes actually our projects, the projects that we're managing, that we're involved in, actually are the first times that really these types of groups of users work together, come together, and really see that there's a lot of interaction. So between general accounting, between revenue accounting, also between those and the technical people. Because, like I said, if you're doing Excel, right, then there's not that much of integration, not that much of contact. You really basically, somebody might generate the data, right, and then it's getting handed off and vanishes into Excel, and somebody else does something with it. That paradigm, that way of approaching business is on the way out with RAR. Back to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That concludes our presentation. I want to thank everybody for attending. Thank you, Hans and Chris, for sharing your knowledge with the team. A reminder that our next webinar will be at the end of June, the fourth Thursday. So please look for that. And we thank everybody for joining, and have a great week. Bye.
Bye-bye.